Our final speaker is Vladyslav Hrynevych, a leading researcher from the Institute of Political and Ethnic Studies at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. And he's changed his title a little bit from quite a bit from what's in the program. So I'll just read you the title. It's Maidan and Anti-Maidan as a conflict of models of historical memory in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. My topic a little bit changed. I stressed it on the Russian mentality and Russian imperial narrative after the Soviet disunion. And I would like you see at this poster. It's Азбука вежливых людей, ABC of polite people. It's after Crimea intervention, a lot of letters about Crimea. For example, the letter E. Crimea, not Ukrainian, but Russian. And Yalta, for example, Anti-Maidan, A. And P. Putin. This is the real state of mentality, what is the brain of the Russian people. By the way, it's the young people. It's student of Novosibirsk University created this. Following the collapse of the USSR, Russian politics of memory underwent several essential changes. After the brief period of Boris Yeltsin's rule, when Russia made an effort to integrate with the world of Western democracy, President Vladimir Putin effected a major change in the course. To a certain extent, this was predicted on various failures in the Russian Federation democratic process, as well as economic difficulties which emerged in the Russian Federation, but also on certain aspects of the Russian national mentality. The effort to contend with the effects of 70 years of totalitarianism began in the early 1990s, was rolled up fairly soon after Mr. Putin's accession to the presidency. A telling example is the issue of a symbol of ancient period, the issue of monument to Felix Dzerzhinsky, the founder of Lenin's secret police. In 1991, it was taken down from the place in Lubyanka Square outside KGB headquarters in Moscow, which continued to house of agency, rebadged as FSB. Early this year, it was returned. Returned to its original locale. According to the poll, 45% of Moscow's citizenry were in favor of the move. In September 2014, Mr. Putin also restored the name Dzerzhinsky Division of the Russian Federation militarizing wing of Second Police. Now the full name of this unit in Russian sounds in such way. Ордена Ленина и Октябрьской революции краснознаменная мотострелковая дивизия особого назначения внутренних войск НКВД имени Феликса Эдмундовича Дзержинского. It's the new Russian name of this unit. It almost goes without saying that the preservation and dissemination of testimonies of suffering in the Gulag are not welcomed by the state apparatus. While the Human Rights Organization Memorial was officially designated as an agency of foreign influence. In post-totalitarian society, the continued use of representation and monuments of the ancient regime can interfere with the transfer of individual experience into the collective memory and remove obstacles to forgetting. By removing monuments to the guilty and erecting cenotaph to victims, the state and society actively reject the heredity connected with the criminal past. Currently, in the arena of Russian political memory, the tragic events of Soviet history have yet to have found adequate symbolic representation. Having decided to selectively focus on the positive aspects of Soviet legacy, Russia refused to accept responsibility for the crimes of communist system. The agentists presented the official historical narrative are not inclined to evaluate Soviet period objectively. But then a significant segment of Russian citizenry is also unwilling to place Stalin's crime in the center of collective memory. According to the recent poll conducted by an independent Moscow-based research organization, the Levada Center, up to 33% do not wish to hear anything about, nor participate in, discussing concerning Stalin's repression. This unwillingness on the part of Russian society to acknowledge responsibility for these crimes inevitably leads to solidarity with the undemocratic authoritarian regime. In addition, following the fall of the USSR, the effort of society of newly independent states to distance themselves from Soviet and Russian heritage, which usually consisted in adapting antithesis to Russian imperialism, has proven to be a source of irritability in Russia's civic consciousness. Analysis by Russian reviewer of textbooks published in non-Russian member countries of Commonwealth of Independent States, CIUS, reached conclusions which have been less than reassuring. Many expressed regretfully that with the exception of Belarus and to a lesser extent Armenia, all other countries are educating succeeding generation from a nationalistic point of view, and that Russia and the Russian people are presented as the primary enemy. In one such analysis, it's noted that if this tendency persists, then after 15-20 years, the event of the 20th century will be comprehensively forgotten by the population of non-Russian former Soviet states. In the consciousness of the people of the former USSR, an image will be formed of Russia as an evil empire, with other course of centuries destroyed, oppressed, and exploits them. Indeed, in the course of recreating narratives of the past in non-Russian CIS countries, a new future requires a new past. Post-colonial and imperial discourses have inevitably come into conflict. At the epicenter of this conflict, apart from the orientation to the Soviet Empire, issues such as Stalinist totalitarianism and genocide have also been addressed. In Baltic countries, mass Stalinist repressions have been examined. Ukrainians have charged Stalinists with instrumentality in committing the Holodomor, while Crimean Tatars and other nationalities subjected to mass deportation have described such action as genocidal. The conflict of memories was intensified by memorializing and commemorative activities that took place in the new independent republics. This applies to action involving the removal or relocation of monuments to the former Soviet leaders, to liberator soldiers, as well as to the establishment of museum dedicated to the study of Soviet occupation, the establishment of days commemorating dates of Soviet occupation. Such day, for example, recently in Moldova, 29 June, Day of Occupation of Moldova. And the celebration of those who struggled for national independence, some of whom came into direct conflict with the Red Army and Soviet power. Ultimately, this had led to a genuine war of memories, in which Russia, particularly after an ascent to the power Mr. Putin, has come to occupy a harsh and uncompromising position. Throughout the 2 terms of presidency and the intervening terms he served as prime minister, a new policy on Russian historiography was adopted so that it would not only strike back at attempts to malign Russia, but would involve the establishment of a novel Russia identity. Given the condition of an anticipated geostrategic confrontation with the West, and in light of the expansion of the European Union to include former Soviet Republic, this was seen as a relevant and immediate imperative. In Moscow, a series of laws were enacted providing for the establishment of branch of the executive devoted to the defense of history, which are strongly reminiscent of Orwell's Ministry of Truth. As Witt contemporaneously note, this amount as commission of historical falsification to benefit the Kremlin. By presidential edict, Mr. Putin's interim successor, Dmitry Medvedev, created an instrument for the formal of state ideology. A logical extension of such efforts was the establishment of a state commission that would publish it a standard textbook of history for the whole Russian Federation. Without a doubt, the principal role in the formation of a standard model of Russian historical memory was played by Mr. Putin himself. As he stated, the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was not either the 2 world wars nor Holocaust, but the dissolution of the USSR. From this, one can readily infer that the symbolic, if not actual, resurrection of the USSR is a goal which he adopted as his primary task and goal. As related to the Second World War and accusation Ukraine in the fascism and so. In the meantime, other deeper transformations were taking place in the Russian Federation memory policy as demonstrated by its imperial and expansionist aims and covetousness, in which Ukraine occupied a central role. This writer was told by a Russian historian that upon Mr. Putin's accession to the presidency, the first assignment he gave Andrei Sakharov, director of the Institute of Russian History, Academy of Science of Russia, took the form a question. Как нам быть с Киевской Русью? How shall we be related to Kievan Rus? He asked him. That is, would be official historical narrative, cede Kievan Rus to Ukraine, share it, appropriate it, or subsume it. It appears that a decision was made to the last, and effort is now made to avoid using expression Kiev Rus at all. In a very recent meeting with a group of Russian historians, Mr. Putin declared Crimea to be the cradle of Russian spirituality, asserting that since it was in Khersones, now in Kiev, that Grand Prince Volodymyr was converted to Christianity, it was there, not in Kiev, that he began his campaign to officially baptize Rus. The Russia president also proposed that a new history of Crimea be written, in which the peninsula would be featured as a major center, even an originated node of Russian civilization. A project titled Novorossiya, New Russia, was also recently launched by the Institute of History, Russian Academy of Science of Russia. Its political motivation is manifest. Generally speaking, the Ukrainian states and the Ukrainian people do not exist for Mr. Putin. He was stated on several occasions that he considered Ukraine to be a fake country created by the Bolshevik, and that there is no such things as Ukrainian nation at all. Unfortunately, to Mr. Putin, his dream of quietly integrating Ukraine into the empire with the tacit agreement of its president Viktor Yanukovych and the Donetsk clan of oligarchs were not realized. A revolution of civic dignity ruined these plans. Sensing that it was losing what remained on its influence in Ukraine, Putin's imperial machine struck a blow in response. The invasion of Crimea and the launching of hybrid war in the Donbass region were designed to hold Ukraine's integration with the European Union. Important component of this effort, apart from the direct use of military means, are provocation of civil unrest in Ukraine, the fomenting of separatism and terrorism, and wide-ranging anti-Ukrainian propaganda campaign, which is afforded to all the personnel and funds of Russia Federation disposal. As far as Russia's populace is concerned, it was already being prepared by an extensive propaganda campaign to support Mr. Putin's expansionism. In 2012, a poll conducted by the Levada Center suggested that only 22% of Russian respondents were satisfied with their country borders. Over 70 favored to return to Soviet-era borders that included Ukraine, Crimea, Baltic Republics, etc. As such, popular support for aggression could be counted on. The Putin's regime anti-Ukrainian propaganda campaign was based on the premise that a fascist junta was seized power in Kiev, but way of a coup. In contrast, the Russian Federation, the successor state of the USSR and its great victory over fascism, the state which was brought liberty to all the Europe and thus has a particular responsibility for the maintaining peace in the world and to punish those who threaten this peace by underscoring its exception contribution to the history of Hitlerism. Russia thus quotes all national struggle for independence which opposes Stalin during the war with fascism. Summing up. After the disunion of the USSR, national states were created. This both process not finished yet. In Russia, Putin tried to restore imperial state, and national countries continue the process of their national building now. This is the main point of conflict between post-colonial, post-imperial narratives. Making Maidan was another step in the anti-imperialist struggle and at the same time in creating of the new Ukrainian identity, much more nationalistic than were before. Its anti-imperial, anti-imperial nature find itself in hymns, banners, songs, various another nationalist ritual and so on. Slogan, as Volodymyr said, and so on. I would like at the end to compare this process in creating the new Ukrainian nationality identity with the process of creating the American national identity during the War for Independence. The Americans and British were similar in culture, in language, in religion, and so. But during this war for independence, the United States created their American identity. Very interesting that US used the modes of French Revolution, democratic modes, against the imperial values of British. Now Ukraine use European democracy values against the Russia imperial values. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think we'll ask.
I have.
Oh, you
2
wanted
minutes.
to show? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You had. Dr. Hrynevych had told me that he wanted to show something and then didn't, so I thought he'd finished.
This is the Donetsk-Lugansk propaganda. This is Donetsk propaganda anti-Ukrainians. And you see all the palitra of this propaganda. No, Ukraine and fascists the same. United States, CIUS, CIA. It's a Soviet element and from the Second World War, and also Lviv, фашистская гадина, бей фашистского гада. Also the same. It's very interesting. Banderistan, Novorossiya. It's dividing Ukraine of Ukraine pro-fascist, pro-European, and pro-Russian. Also anti-American, very interesting posters. I forget to say that very interesting slogan now in Russia. Дошли до Берлина, дойдем до Вашингтона. It's very спасибо деду за победу. Тогда мы были сильные, нас всех боялись, и дошли до Берлина, дойдем до Вашингтона. It's a new something. It's also anti-American. It's Putin after in Crimea. It's Putin liberator. It's very interesting, such Русский мир plakat, old Russia, old Rus, and Second World War, myth of Second World War, Great Patriotic War. Stalin знал, в чем сила русского духа. Also very interesting this plakat.
So Stalin knew the strength of the Russian spirit.
Is this?
Oh. Just press
I would
escape.
like escape.
There we go.
It's also Русский мир, you see. Oh, it's a very interesting phenomenon. Anti-fascist, anti-Semite. It's propaganda, антифашистская пропаганда Донецка с элементами антисемитизма. Почему все это называется Украина? Why it's all called Ukraine? Also such, it's anti-Poroshenko. Почувствуй вкус настоящего фашизма.
Experience the taste of real fascism. That's the brand that
It's
Poroshenko
our
owns.
prime minister. Also very interesting. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.